Hello and welcome to BYJU'S IAS. Today we are joined by a noted Indian academic, international food critic, and historian, Professor Dr. Pushpesh Pant sir. Sir retired as Dean at School of International Studies in JNU. Government of India awarded him the Padma Shri in 2016. Sir is India's leading expert on international relations as well as Indian cuisine. Professor Pant has published widely on travel and tourism as well, and over a dozen books to his credit. And particularly for civil services aspirants, Sir is synonymous with international relations. Welcome to BYJU'S IAS, sir.
Thank you, Dr.
We are
Jha.
really honored and privileged, sir.
Thank you.
Sir, you are expert of international relations, art and culture. I recently went through your book on art and culture, so well-researched book. You are an international food critic, but I will start with international relations, sir.
Perfect.
Sir, this ongoing crisis or the war in Europe between Russia and Ukraine, would it be correct to say that the biggest loser is United States of America and biggest winner is China?
I would agree with you almost entirely. I think it is not the war in Ukraine which has decided that America is on the losing side. I think America lost out long time back. I think when America had to withdraw rather ignominiously from Afghanistan in the darkness of the middle of the night without telling its allies that it was vacating the battlefield, did not even worry about evacuating its allies and so on, left armaments behind which could be abused by Taliban. The 20-year-long war had shown that America, which claimed to be the hyperpower, the superpower, was not in a position to maintain its self in Afghanistan. So that was the beginning of the world recognizing that America was a declining power, a power in retreat. I would go further and say that even in 2014, much before the Taliban had taken over Kabul, Americans kept quiet when Russians had annexed Crimea, and the response of the Western world was not strong enough as a pushback, so which encouraged Putin to embark on a more adventurous course. Let's look at another theater. Let's look at the South China Sea and Indo-Pacific Rim. Americans have been not in a position to take on the Chinese there also. They've been trying to put India in front and say, let's have an organization like Quads. Quads was marginalized, then AUKUS came, but Indian involvement in South China Sea and Indo-Pacific Rim again was the reluctance or the inability of Americans to keep the presence, maintain a presence there. So I would say that American defeat had started even before Putin intervened in Ukraine, and it probably, he was encouraged. He was probably confident that the Americans will not be in a position to take him on, and that's what led to the misadventure. So the first part of the question, I think, is very clear-cut. America has lost out most in this. It has divided the European Union on this war. European major powers like France and Germany think that they should have an independent communication channel with Putin's Russia. They are dependent on Russian energy for their energy security, and they don't think that America is any longer a credible partner. That's the first part. Yeah. The second question is a little more complicated. When you say that China is the greatest winner, I would tend to agree. I think China, although some skeptics say that China over a period of time in long terms will find that it is not really a gainer, because it would be also, if it is on the Russian side, it would be sort of resurrection of the Cold War bloc, communist bloc, and the economic sanctions imposed on Russia would also probably impact on China. But I don't quite agree with this interpretation, because I think that the Chinese also have been facing some kind of a trade war since Trump's days there, and the Americans have been reluctant to let the Chinese technology companies like Huawei enter the American market. I mean, Donald Trump, the ex-president, had to concede that we can't disengage from China. China is, after all, the second largest economy in the world. So, but I don't think that the Americans can do to China what they are doing to the Russians, like boycotting them from SWIFT. Because it would impact so adversely. China has ingratiated itself with the international economic system to an extent. Take the supply chain mismanagement or traumas during the COVID pandemic. I think the Chinese stand to gain the most for a simple reason. that their energy requirements are dependent on the gas and fossil fuel supplies from Siberia and Russia.
Right.
Now they would be in a position, because Russia can't trade in dollars, so they probably can persuade Russia to supply oil and gas to them against their currency,
Correct.
yuans and so on.
Correct.
So that, I think, is something which we should not underestimate. And this is the opportunity for China to have Russia as a junior partner in the alliance, because Russia is besieged, Russia is treated as an outcast. So I think the China-Russia combination, now China is a senior partner at the moment. And the Americans cannot be on all fronts. So if they are defending Europe, which is their primary interest, and for Putin also the European presence is more important, his activities in the Middle East. So China is having a free run of South China Sea, Indo-Pacific region and South Asia. So I would think that China is decidedly the largest gainer.
Thank you, sir. Sir, you talked about restrictions and sanctions to be imposed by America on Russia, and if China joined hands with Russia, then on China. So, do you fear invocation of CAATSA as well?
Well, you know, sooner or later India will have to face this, because India has the primary source of military hardware from Russia. Although we have tried, since Mr. Modi came to power, diversify our sources of military hardware. We buy like Rafale fighter jets from France. We have equipment coming from Israel. Israel is an important source for us. We even have, but our dependence on Russia still is there. Take the recent example. When we were confronted post-Galwan with Chinese threat on the Himalayan border, we wanted to have S-400 anti-missile batteries from Russia. 2 platoons have come, but 3 more are in the pipeline. So Americans at that moment were trying to contain China, and they thought that if India is to be persuaded to be more enthusiastic as a member of the Quads, they would keep quiet and have a waiver, like they said when India was dealing at one time with Iran and India was committed to the Chabahar port upgradation. Americans had also kept quiet, not quite given a clean waiver, but said we would watch and wait and watch and decide each issue by that. But Indians would have to face this, that if by extension the CAATS is invoked, the economic sanctions, especially in the military hardware, what happens to its military supplies from Russia? Not only the S-400 anti-missile batteries, we are dependent on Russians for Sukhois, for MiGs, for helicopters and Anatoliev transport aircraft and series of tanks.
Right.
These require spare parts. These require maintenance. And our only aircraft carrier is of Russian origin, aging one, refurbished one. So we have lots of platforms and force multipliers which depend on continued supply from Russia, not fresh purchases, but even spares and refurbishment and repairs. So I think Indians would have to worry about that, although I would still think that the Americans would be very cautious about alienating India because of Ukraine and impose the same sanctions on it. But again, the Americans will also have not too much choice, because there is not too much of a favorable climate of opinion for India across the parties, Democratic or Republicans, where they think that if we give them so much, why don't they vote according to our desires? And if they say that we have a special strategic partnership with them, how can they be with our enemies, Russia and China? But you see, this is a very double standard, hypocritical standard. The Americans have not been able to disengage themselves from the Chinese economics. And actually, the Chinese trade with India has increased even after Galwan. So they can't expect India to toe the American line because of that. And I think the Americans would also have to think that unless the whole world is willing to impose the same sanctions, will the French do away about their Rafale deal with India? Will somebody else do with the nuclear submarine deal? So there would be a conflict of interest in what was termed the military industrial complex in America and other military manufacturers or military supplies elsewhere. It could even be Turkey having pilotless drones, which it supplies. So, and if Americans put India in a tight corner, India would probably find itself in a very uneasy alliance where Pakistan, China, India and Iran are in the same side taking on the Americans.
Right. Thank you, sir. Now, sir, there is one question any aspirant would be very interested in. Any war creates a very grave humanitarian crisis, say refugee crisis. Take the example of Indian students stranded in Ukraine. we are having reports of racism as well with regards to refugees. Where would they go? Indian students are preferred to or advised to go to Romania side. Ukrainians, they are fleeing towards Poland, and so on and so forth. So how do you address, and what should be a student's take with regards to the angle of racism?
That's an extremely interesting question and a complex question. Dr. Jha, I think one should view it realistically. Let's say the numbers involved. The Indian medical and engineering students in Ukraine are about 30,000 at the outer limit. The total number of refugees exodus from Ukraine has been estimated as of this morning, towards the middle of March, almost 1.5 million. And 1.5 million out of a population of 100 million is exactly, a very large figure.
Right.
So the Indian refugees, students are not refugees. They are being repatriated home under difficult circumstances. They have been made refugees, they have been made homeless, they are facing racism, they are facing outlawry is there. They are for the first time probably they are also facing not only Indian students, the Arab students, the African students are facing racism. True. Now we know about it. We don't know what kind of discrimination they faced when they were studying there for the past so many years. That's one part. The second part is that what you raised, a very interesting issue, is the humanitarian crisis.
Right.
It is for the first time the Europeans have thrown open their borders to their European brethren. If your hair is golden, if your eyes are blue, you can be received in our homes. We will have reception centers at the border. But others will be pushed back. Others will be, say, priority is for Ukrainians to come, the divided families and so on. It is whether it is Poland, whether it is Hungary, one step removed Germany. I think we are facing the fact that the humanitarian crisis in Ukraine is being interpreted differently by Europeans and Americans than the humanitarian crisis earlier. Syrian refugee crisis, Afghan refugee crisis, the humanitarian crisis, Yemen and South Sudan, those were people of color. That I think we have to consider.
And that is a very deplorable thing.
Of course, condemnable, deplorable, but one has to live with it.
Right.
One has to live with racism, and there has been this issue of Islamophobia.
Sir. Right, sir. Great. Now, sir, let us come back to India's position on this crisis. India abstained from United Nations. But at the same time, India tries to maintain balance between the West, led by Washington, and India historically has a very good relation with Russia. After abstaining from voting, what is your take on it, that India had sided with any particular group, or India had simply followed a principled stand of non-alignment?
I would tend to agree that this is the moment of rebirth of non-alignment. Because not only since Mr. Modi came as a Prime Minister, India has been veering towards the America, a special strategic relationship, opting for the regime of the World Trade Organization, embarking on the path of globalization and economic reforms, no ideological divide with America anymore, accepting capitalism as a precondition for faster economic development. So we were closer to America in recent years than we had been to Russia. This had displeased Russia to an extent, even our diversification, which we have talked about, of military hardware. They had started supplying arms to Pakistan. Our relationship with Russia was cordial, but not as intimate and as special as it was, let's say, in 1971 and so on. The interesting part in this is that the Americans think that India owes it to them to vote always in their favor. Personally, I have always felt that India has made a mistake by following the American lead in international affairs, whether it is about Iran, cutting down our oil imports from Iran, or whether joining Quads and so on. Ukraine was the moment of truth when India had to take a stock and see where our interests lay. But the point is that Russia is far more important to India even today. Even I would dare say China is more important to India than USA at the moment. So I think what India did, it did not abstain from UN, it abstained from the vote in Security Council, it abstained from the vote in even condemning Russia in General Assembly. So, but the point is, this falls into a pattern, like Nehru said about non-alignment. It is not neutrality, it is not opportunism, it is not idealism. It is basically judging each issue on merit and deciding India's course of action, test of what meets our national interest. And at the moment, is going to be increasingly difficult in coming days. But as of this moment, I think India did the right thing.
Thank you, sir. Now, sir, coming back to a very important thing. First, we had for the last 2.5 years COVID pandemic. Then we saw Taliban taking over Afghanistan. Then we see the issues of Chinese actions in South China Sea and Taiwan, China's aggressive posturing. Now we have crisis in Ukraine, which will affect entire Europe and in a way entire world. Even if already there was an issue with Libya and Syria. What is your position, sir? How much time it will take, or how in the world can come out of this mess and normalize relationship, or we have to live with it?
This is a very difficult question to answer, Dr. Shah, because what you are asking is whether we'll have to learn to live with this instability.
Yes.
Like we have been told repeatedly that you have to learn to live with COVID. Now, COVID can become from a pandemic, from a crisis to an endemic disease. We get infection, certain people get died, the numbers come down to lesser people die of COVID than they die in traffic accident, and we learn to live with that. That's one part. We have enough vaccination, and can we learn to live with climate change, which might be an extreme weather condition which has been in the back burner because of the COVID? Same thing applies to Ukraine. I think what we are witnessing in the Russian intervention in Ukraine is that the world order as it had emerged after the end of the Cold War, the détente and the rapprochement between Russia and America, normalization of relationship between USA and China after the Vietnam War, all this is changing. So we are once again in a state of anarchy, and whenever there is an argument that there should be a rule-based system, there should be respect for international law, there should be respect for territorial integrity and sovereignty, people are bound to ask the question, were these questions not relevant when USA was having a regime change in Iraq, in Syria, in Afghanistan, in Libya? Then the question was not there. And then we are talking of weapons of mass destruction, chemical weapons being used, biological weapons being used, or threat of biological weapon, threat of a nuclear accident. Wasn't this the case in Iraq? Hasn't it been proved that all that was a fabrication?
Right.
There were embedded journalists, including in BBC, in Washington Post and New York Times, everybody was duped. And if the Americans could ride roughshod over the sovereignty of a nation, much more historically ancient and significant and oil producing than maybe even Ukraine. And then how could you say that suddenly these questions become important now, today? So I would say that, the former Foreign Secretary, Mr. Shiv Shankar Menon, the former National Security Advisor, has described it brilliantly. He was writing about 3 years back, before the direct intervention in Ukraine by Russia. He said that the current world is militarily unipolar, economically bipolar, and politically confused. Now, I think that situation has not changed, although the world today, as Ukraine has shown, is not militarily unipolar. America has retreated, and Putin can take on the Americans militarily, and President Biden has to concede that American military boots would not be put in Ukraine, and they also will say that no-fly zone would not be declared because we can't risk a nuclear holocaust having a confrontation with the Russians. So which means that militarily it is not a unipolar world anymore. The Chinese could have the same kind of a threatening posture in Taiwan, but the situation is a little different about Taiwan, which we can discuss separately, that the whole world, including America, recognizes one China policy. India recognizes, America recognizes, so Taiwan is a part of, an integral part of China, People's Republic of China. So it is not the case of Ukraine, where independence has been declared since 1991. So the interesting part is this: the world will have to learn to live with a state of tumult, instability, anarchy, and how it impacts on us. But I would again, maybe I'm a minority of one, but I still think that this would impact far more in Europe than it would impact on the rest of the world. We still have to worry very much more about the expansion, aggression of China, and how do we balance our economic relationship with China. As I said earlier, our trade with China has increased despite the COVID, despite the Galvan. Right. So how are we going to, and when we said we can produce vaccines, we can supply the world the needs, we realized that our advanced pharmaceutical intermediaries came from China. The PPEs came from China. The telecom equipment is from China. Most of the chips which go into computers and mobile phones, etc., or television, come from Taiwan or from China. Even the Apple phones which we have are made in China. So I don't know whether Ukraine is of such crucial significance to us at the moment. It will impact on Turkey very much. It will impact on Israel very much. It is not an accident. Again, as we talk in the second week of March, the Israeli Prime Minister Bennett is in Moscow talking directly to Putin. And he's also saying that this is the opportunity for the Jews in Ukraine, in Russia, to come back and join the motherland, the Holy Land in Israel. So I do very much think that the world will learn to live with instability and anarchy. We lived with Afghanistan for 20 years. Right. Before that, we have lived with the Israeli aggression against the Palestinians. We have actually cultivated a friendly relationship with Israel. We have learned to live with the humanitarian crisis in Yemen. We have learned to live with Chinese expansion in South China Sea. So we have lived with this. So I think one more factor is added to it.
So, but sir, there is one question which is supplementary to the answer, that we have to live with this global instability. How new challenges are being posed by this regime of instability before the upcoming IFS officers in particular and bureaucrats in general? What challenges they face and how can they protect India's national interests?
I think that again is a brilliant question. It's not only a challenge for diplomats or foreign service officers. Ultimately, how India copes. Let's look at India. India is the second most populous nation in the world. It is not like a tail which can be attached to a dog and it can be wagged according to which direction the dog is going. The Indians are not only the second most populous nation in the world, they have a population dividend in their favor. We are a young population. Chinese is an aging population. So in coming decades, if we conduct ourselves well in our economy, we have social justice ensured. If India can have a prolonged period of peace and prosperity at home, it can cope with international challenges far more easily, because I believe that India's primary threats to its internal security, to integrity, territorial integrity, would be from Pakistan, from Afghanistan, the Taliban, Islamic Sultanate of the Khorasan province. It could be China trying to encircle us from Myanmar to Sri Lanka. Those things come back again. So as long as the Indian bureaucrats realize that there has to be not boastful claims about how we are going to be the third largest economy in the next 5 years, but as long as we can ensure a minimum assured growth rate and redistributive justice. Let us not forget, even Xi Jinping has had to cut down to size its entrepreneurs like Alibaba, Jack Ma, and other people, the infrastructural companies, and he has made two things very clear in the recent party congress, that there has to be social justice and there has to be social responsibility. So I think shared prosperity and social justice, if India keeps in mind, not that the slogan has come from China, but that is what we have to do, then we can cope with. So the aspiring civil servants should keep in mind that our primary problem is not the world without. It is the world within our own boundaries. And I think foreign policy is never separate. It is a projection of domestic policies.
Right.
So how you define your national interest, how the ruling interest aligns the national interest with the aspirations of the masses is what the civil servant aspirants should keep in mind. So there has to be understanding about problems with Indian economy at the moment, problems of Indian society at the moment, how an enemy can work on this and subvert our stability. This is what we should be more careful about.
Sir, thank you, sir. Now, sir, there is one question. If we come back to our ancient Indian history, we find Ashoka conquered Kalinga, but looking at the pain and human sufferings, he denounced war. And we do not find any such instance or example in entire history. But nowadays, war is being used or furthered or even strengthened and encouraged to further national interest. Does it serve national interest in the long run?
I'm afraid that Ashoka did not quite renounce the war even after the bloodshed of Kalinga. If you go over to the Ashokan inscriptions, he says that he did not dismantle his army. He continued to maintain an army. And he says that I have had to use force to subdue insurgent tribals in the periphery of the empire. So he became, some say a Buddhist, some say a pacifist, but he did not dismantle the army and he remained a powerful enough, an emperor with the military force at it. And if you see the Indian political philosophy, Ashoka is not only an exception in the world history, he is also an exception in Indian history. There have not been too many people who have renounced war and become total pacifists at all. No way at all. So I think Sun Tzu, again the Chinese person, who talked in terms of war as an instrument of policy and deceit, and Clausewitz, the great German, who also said that war is continuation of policy through other means. So how do you conduct war? Even today, it doesn't mean that you go out with missiles and kill people. There could be cyber, there could be cyber war, there could be war of propaganda, there could be cryptocurrency, there could be subversion and wrecking. So all these are parts of war. So Sam, Dam, Danda, Bhed were the instrumentalities of weakening the enemy, which Arthashastra and Kautilya, going back to modern times, has. So I would say that war will continue to be not necessarily a war in which people are killed. You have warfare today which are precision weapons. At least it is claimed that they can be targeted so precisely that a person can be taken out, a terrorist or something like Osama bin Laden, or a commando operation or a drone attack. It can do it like it did Suleiman Qasemi, the Iranian general, or a top Iranian scientist. At times there is collateral damage. At times you say that we have clean nuclear bombs which don't create too much radiation, tactical nuclear weapons. That's what Putin says that Ukrainians were preparing to use against him. You also could have vacuum bombs which suck all the oxygen from the air and result in a fireball. So it only can destroy property, it can destroy, not necessarily destroy lives, human lives. But then there are small, low-scale, long-drawn conflicts like in Afghanistan, where anti-personnel weapons, sort of improvised explosive devices can maim people, can make people cripples. So, there is cruelty about war. But isn't there cruelty about man-made shortages, about famine, ruling elites being totally corrupt, not becoming wise about... Take another instance. I would say there is an ecological war, an ecocide. Americans use the Agent Orange in Vietnam to defoliate the whole thing, so nothing grows there. But forget about that. Right now, Bolsonaro in Brazil is destroying Amazonian rainforests at a rate which would end the carbon sinks, which would make a mockery of the temperature control carbon emissions. You take the third largest rainforest in Borneo is being cut down at a rate of hundreds of thousands of acres per day. You have the same problem arising in the basin of Congo River in Africa, the second largest rainforest. So if these rainforests are destroyed, isn't that a reckless, subversive warfare against humanity in general, not only people of their own country, having an impact on global destiny in coming days? So I think if you look at war not only as guns and bayonets and bombs, but in terms of what you can do, wreck a country's economy by infecting it. The COVID, some people said, was a biological weapon which was being developed, which escaped out of, and Putin again says that this kind of a biological weapon was being developed in an American-assisted lab in Ukraine. So it is, interesting. But war would remain there.
Different facets of war are there. So now coming back to economical part. Our global economy was down already because of the COVID pandemic. Indian economy was also very down. Because of the war, oil prices are shooting up. It will have a very adverse impact on our balance of payment. So will it not, as Financial Times says, we are going or heading towards recession? How India can insulate itself?
I don't know if any country in the world today can insulate itself after having integrated itself with the world interdependence. You might say that made for India, made in India, everything in India, autonomous in India, but no country can be totally autonomous in this day and age. This is one part. There is an interdependence. I have a different take on this question. When the recession hits us and our foreign exchange dwindles and our rupee goes down because of the dollar prices, dollar being adversely related to us, our exports might grow. So it depends on what section of economy might grow. Like our finance minister in the budget speech said that Indian economy's projected growth rate is this. Nobody is disputing that. Only the statistics are confusing because the entrepreneurs, the capitalists, those who are manufacturing and exporting, their exports would flourish. But it doesn't necessarily mean that the masses of India would not have adverse impact on their lives because of prices of essential goods like food grains, like oil seeds, like even transport. The classic case is Sri Lanka, but that's even before the COVID, because of a long drawn civil war. They had depleted their foreign resources. COVID impacted the major source of their income, the tourism, and now they have a problem of even buying fuel. So it becomes a vicious circle. Hopefully India will escape that, because India is much too large a country, much too diverse a country, and Indians as a people are very resilient. But this is again goes back to the question which you raised, which is the fundamental question. How do the aspirants for civil services realize and cope with this problem? We have to worry about that we have to be self-sufficient in food production, which we to a large extent are. We are not energy sufficient, but the two are related. And we should ensure that if the export-led growth is principally the factor registering a high economic development rate, benefit should be shared. There has to be a shared prosperity.
Thank you, sir. Now, sir, coming back to your another area of expertise, that is art and culture. And the kind of book authored by you, every student is now referring to, there are so many questions in actual interview in UPSC on art and culture part. It is very difficult for a student, a graduate or postgraduate, to acquire that kind of skill and skill set to answer such question. Regarding art and culture, sir, what are the areas a student should keep in mind, and how to handle if a student is not aware of the nuances of that cultural aspect, the question that has been asked, how to handle it?
Dr. Shah, this is a very interesting question, because I think that no student can say with any degree of honesty that he doesn't know what culture is, what Indian culture is, what various aspects are. Because our culture is very much an integral part of our identity. If I am from Tamil Nadu, I speak Tamil language. I know that Bharatanatyam is a dance of my state. I know that the temples in my state have gigantic sky-touching gopurams. They are very different from what the temples elsewhere are. On the contrary, if there is a person who belongs to, shall we say, Odisha, he knows that his temples look different. The language is Odissi. He knows that the dance form there is Odissi. And again, the Odissi dance is sung to, let's say, Geet Govinda. And the story of Nimai Thakur and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu disappearing, merging with the Krishna in Jagannath temple is there. So Bengal, Odisha cultural strain is there. If you are in Manipur, which is seem to be outside the mainstream, you again have a Ras, you have the Krishna Leela, you have the Vaishnav Bhajans. So I think that any part of country where an Indian comes from, he is a Hindu or a Muslim or a Sikh, or he is from Ladakh, or he is from Kerala, is Kalaripatta or Kathakali or unarmed combat. Everybody eats a certain kind of food at home. So my advice to these students would be, like the ancient wisdom is Atmanam Vidhi, know thyself, ask yourself who you are. So the moment you say who you are, you locate yourself in a place. You locate yourself in a caste spectrum, you locate yourself in a religious spectrum, you locate yourself in a linguistic spectrum, you locate yourself in rich versus poor, urban versus rural, male versus female, and then you say, in our house this was the festival, in our tradition this used to be done. So you know, in North, it was for a long time people would say Madrasi, and Madrasi would be Tamilian, Kannadiga, Andhra, Malayali. Within these states we would have differences, Ayers, Iyengars, Chettinads, Vaishyas, Nadars, Toddy Tappers and so on. So I think this is really begging the question. I think you don't mug up culture, you don't mug up art, but your question has to be answered more specifically. I think you should start with the built up heritage. When you start with built-up heritage, you talk of caves in Bhimbetka, you talk of well-planned cities in Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, you talk in terms of temple architecture, forts and palaces, monuments, mausoleums like Taj Mahal. All the way from Mohenjo-daro to present day, you have built-up heritage which shows different traits. You have mosques, you have temples, you have churches, you have gurdwaras, you have public places. When you come to built-up heritage, then you have sculpture and painting, which is natural. In temples there are sculptures, there are idols, there are paintings, Ajanta in the cave paintings and so on. So you are naturally led from built-up heritage to painting and sculpture. What do sculptures and paintings show you? Those show you lives of people in every day. They show their trading, they show their dance and music. So it leads us naturally to dance and music. So once you come to dance and music, it is performing arts. When you come to performing arts, you come to theatre and cinema. What does theatre and cinema do? It deals with literature. It is communication. It is medium. In the beginning, if you go back to 25,000-year-old cave paintings in Bhimbetka, it is the story of the hunt. Language is not there, but people are painting pictures like a child's sketches. This is where honey is, this is where the animals are, this is a safe area. So you are telling a story, you are plotting a map. And it continues the mudras of dance. You have mudra like this and you say this is the Brahmar, this is the lotus, Brahmar comes to the lotus. So you get into painting, you get into color, then you get into literature, then you get into film. So everything starting from built up heritage to sculpture to paintings to music to dance to literature to films is integrated. And then it comes to extension of Indian culture abroad. Take something like food or non-tangible culture. You say, what do I eat? How do I eat it? Is my pattal a kele ka patta, or is it a gunmetal plate, or is it a brass plate? Is it a food cooked steamed? It is rice? Is it grains? And the agriculture comes into culture. So I think this leads to soft power. This leads to India's extension to countries in Southeast Asia, in Central Asia. There's a religious connection, Buddhism, Islam, Sufi tradition, langars, and so on. So I personally think that it is a fascinating area, and the student should not try to mug up. I should not be plugging my own book. You are kind enough to say it was written by me. It is not written by me actually. It is a compilation of and recollection of my exposure to different cultural influences in my life, which enrich my life. So it is, I think, any student trying to enrich his life will be automatically best prepared for the interview. No question can be asked which you can't honestly answer. And you don't have to like everything. You can say, I like Dhrupad music, or you say, I like Khayal Gaiki. I like Thumri, I like Dadra. I like Vaishnav bhajans. You don't have to like everything. You may like Kathak. There are 8 Indian classical dances. You don't have to like 8. But you probably, wherever you come from, you should know what lyricism or what percussion in a particular instrument is. I think it's a fascinating subject.
Great. Thank you, sir. Now, sir, last question. You have coached so many students, thousands of students. You will see that students, they invariably write, cooking food is my hobby. Reading book is my hobby. And when you start grilling a student on that, they react, they are unable to answer. They may think that their grilling is perhaps not appropriate. But when they feel something as hobby, what should...
Dr. Jha, I think this is again one of those trick questions, booby traps. If you don't have a hobby, if you have been always mugging up to go to Kota, go to IIT, cram up for IAS, you have never had time for a hobby. But I think what I would like to advise the students is that you must relax. All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy is the old adage, old phrase. All adages are old, of course, so one word superfluous there. But I think if you have a hobby, you should have a genuine hobby. Don't write a hobby which you have read somewhere, stamp collection, music, reading books, watching films, or cooking. If you have a hobby, take the trouble to learn about that subject. From gardening to cooking. What do you cook? Right. Everyday food. Dal roti. What dal do you do? What tadka do you do? So you can, the moment you don't speak the truth, you will get caught. So that is what I think should not happen at all.
Right. Thank you, sir. And lastly, sir, what would be your message? Because now the students are waiting for their mains result. Then they will be appearing for the interview. Hopefully, actual interviews will start from the last week of March or first week of April. What is your message, sir? What should they do? How should they utilize this time?
Dr. Jha, this I think is the crucial question. I think I recollect a conversation which we have had in the past years. A student should not prepare for one particular exam and start cramming. Mains ka result aa jayega, then I will start preparing for the interviews. Or I would prepare for next year's preliminary again or mains again. I think this should be treated as a critical moment, a decisive moment in a young person's life, boy and girl. And you should prepare probably with a 2-year time span in mind, that I would prepare primarily for clearing the preliminary to begin with, but take it for granted that I will clear the preliminaries and then start preparing for your optionals and mains. And as far as general studies is concerned, I think it is an ongoing process. I don't ever believe that you can have general knowledge preparation. Right. General knowledge you acquire and accumulate over a period of time. So my advice would be that start taking general studies seriously, all 3 papers, start preparing for essay seriously, and this preparation will automatically equip you to fare very well in the interview viva voce also. Some would say that preliminary is a lottery. I don't think it is a lottery. UPSC is one of those extremely straight examinations. If you know the syllabus, if you know the mechanics, there is very little chance that you will goof up, but give yourself one chance and probably spread it over 2 years.
Great. Thank you so very much.
Thank you,
sir.
Dr. Shah. Thank you so
And
much.
sir, the way you answered the questions not only from international relations, but you gave a master key to address questions related to art and culture. And what I have seen in my past, students, they write about their hobby. What should they mean when they write something as hobby? Such an enlightening and brilliant session, sir, and hopefully it will help immensely to the students of civil services. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you so much.